We have breaking economic news today that could change everything. What we learned, the Biden economy was a hell of a lot crappier than we were told. Oh, excuse me, I should have said weaker. The Bureau of Labor Statistics data was even more flawed than we thought. The Federal Reserve is making it up as they go along, and the economists and experts that hammered the president have egg on their faces. And welcome to the Big Money Show. I'm Dagan McDowell, along with my co-hosts Lou Bassanese, Brian Brenberg, Jackie DeAngelis, and with us for this hour, Fox News contributor Liz Peek. Jobs mirage, a massive downward revision of job growth over the last year. 911,000 fewer jobs than originally reported. That is not a rounding error. That is a whiff of epic proportions. Can you smell the stench? We were told the economy was booming before President Trump took office. Turns out that was a lie. Washington bureaucrats inflated the numbers. The media ran with it. The Federal Reserve ran with it. Voters were told everything just fine. That's why President Trump fired the head of the BLS, because Americans deserve honest numbers, not manipulated statistics. So here are the cold, hard facts. The pre-Trump economy was built on a rotten foundation. The jobs weren't real, the growth wasn't real, and now the numbers prove it. The only question, is it too late to fix it? Well, it begins with the big, beautiful law that really is kind of taking form and shape in the economy. But Liz, how do you see these numbers?
I think it's an incredible mess. And remember, it follows on the heel of the year earlier revision of 818,000 jobs. The interesting thing to me, looking at the numbers, every single sector of the economy was weaker than it was reported to be. So I think you have, in totality, an administration that was basically lying about the strength of the economy. But remember, when they took office in Dagan, in January 2021, they told us, oh, the economy was struggling. It was on its heels. That's why they needed to pass the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Act. The economy was in shambles. That wasn't true. So they were basically lying about the strength of the economy from the get-go. And then they were saying, well, we turned it around. Now it's really fabulous. And that wasn't true either. I think the big takeaway here is we have lousy numbers. I don't know that they were all manipulated. I think they were all really badly collected, and we've been making serious policy decisions based on bad numbers. And I think secondarily, Trump was completely right to fire the head. McIntyre was the name of the BLS chief who was responsible for these terrible numbers.
Every president says the economy that they got was worse, and that's why they're in the bind that they're in. But this time, it's actually true. And as we were living through that Biden economy, through that 4 years, we kept saying, and questioning, by the way, how is this economy standing up with all of this spending, with record high inflation? And we also said, the labor market is the only thing that they have that they can hang their hat on to say, hey, we're actually doing okay here. And now here we are in September of 2025, and we're finding out the numbers were all wrong. That's almost 1 million jobs that was misreported in that span of time. And so you got to ask yourself, what happened here? Because sometimes mistakes happen. It's funny when it happens to President Trump. They're never in his favor, but this one time you're seeing, wow, this could have, had an impact on the election. It could have had an impact on everything. You're talking about policy decisions. We have a serious problem here. He was right to fire the head of the BLS. He is right to dig into the bottom of it here. And I'm glad that the real numbers are coming out so that we could see what we had to work with, and where we go from here.
These benchmark revisions, though, happen rough every year at this time. And the revision last year, and it came out in August, during the DNC, was close to this big. It was 818,000 fewer workers had been hired over the previous period. So the revision to the downside was almost as big as the one that we just got. Yeah. And in fact, because it dropped during the DNC, the Democrats were caught with their pants down. Gina Raimondo was asked in an interview on TV about it, the then Commerce Secretary, and she was like, what?
Yeah, well, she didn't even know what the BLS data was.
That's not true. Yeah. Did that happen? I'm imitating her in a way that isn't accurate, but she, in essence, questioned whether that had even happened. And it did. So it just speaks to the problem within the data collection, as Jackie was pointing out.
Yeah, I mean, put this in context here. I mean, last year was 818,000. This year, over 900,000. The average since 2015, if we exclude the last 2 years, is about 100,000 revision downward. That's normal. That's within a margin of error. What raises concern for me here is it's twofold. One, the Fed's been operating on faulty data, right? So now we know absolutely the labor market's cooled. They're going to have to cut rates. But what other data can't we trust, right? This brings into question. It's not going to just be isolated to this because the government is in control of reporting data on so many metrics in the U.S. economy. Is there something else out there that we've been having false pretenses about that we don't know about yet? Is there another shoe to drop?
Let's not give Jerome Powell too much of a pass because of the faulty data, because to your point, a certain amount of this can be baked in, it can be expected. And I think that somebody at that level should be looking at this data in a different way. That's something that he didn't do. And so he will rely on that as a crutch. Well, I didn't have the right data to be able to make decisions. There was other data. There's independent data that the Fed collects. There's the inflation data. They could have made a lot of decisions that they didn't make. So if that becomes the narrative that, oh, we relied on this in this way, I'm not saying it should be wrong. It should be right. We should have good data and make decisions based on that. But I don't want to hear that from the
but
left.
I'd argue, though, when should he have cut then, right? How long ago? Should it have been 3 months, 9 months? I've been in the hawkish camp up until, the first quarter of this year because inflation hadn't cooled yet, but now we've gotten the last 4 to 5 months where it's really staying in place. So if he cuts 25 basis points in September, would it make a difference if he started, at the last meeting? I don't think. I mean, we're talking about not a blunt instrument, right?
Right.
It's not going to make a huge change to the
Jackie's point, remember during last year, I think it was in August, Jay Powell actually questioned the jobs numbers because it was so strong. And he said, there's something kind of off about this.
Yeah.
So he had some inkling that the numbers weren't accurate. Why didn't he do anything about it?
Well, maybe you start by, asking the Biden administration, hey, who's running the place? Who's running BLS? Because, when the Fed chair comes out and says, I don't believe numbers, that ought to be kind of like a little red flag to the folks at the BLS. Maybe we should do something. I don't know that they did anything. And then when Trump fired McIntyre or whoever was running the BLS, everyone started wringing their hands like, oh my gosh, now he's going to rig the numbers. How can you rig BLS numbers that are off by 1 million this year and 900,000 last year? It is such a joke. The Biden economy was strangled by regulation, so Trump undid that. The BLS can't count, so he undid that. And yet every one of these critics wants to say he's wrecking independence. Are you kidding me? This isn't independence. It's complete inaccuracy. And you can't possibly manage monetary policy on this basis. The ship is sinking. He's patching it up, and thank goodness he's doing it.
Yeah, intro to stats going all the way back to college. Garbage in, garbage out with statistics. And we've had a lot of garbage. Maybe the auto pen was doing more than we thought. Maybe it was filling out this data. I mean, it's unfathomable that it's off by this much.
Well, human detritus. It's not a computer error.
Right.
But one thing we do know, the Federal Reserve is now choosing to support the job market over fighting inflation. So we're going to get the consumer price index out later this week. And Bank of America came out with its forecast, and CPI, the headline, is going to go up to 2.9%. And so it's been the headline number has been creeping up. April, it was at 2.3, July, 2.7. So inflation expectations, the 5-year inflation break even is 2.5, roughly. Inflation's going to be at 2.9%. So if the Fed's going to cut because of the job weakness, that's a choice.
Yeah, but I'd rather they err on the side of the cratering labor market than the creep in inflation.
And you could
it's
also argue
sure.
that sort of the de facto new benchmark, even though it's not set in stone or written anywhere, is kind of the 3% mark. And they've sort of been operating at least until now, looking at that as a new normal because of the crazy 9% that they came off of. So maybe you can make
But
that
it's,
argument.
it's a good point. That the Trump administration inherited an economy that was much more stagflationary than anybody actually wanted to say. The job picture was already bad. Inflation hadn't gotten better. And I agree, we're probably still in that spot, and that's a really tough spot to be in. But let's not kid ourselves. The prevailing narrative in the financial press is the Biden economy had kind of shorn up, right? It was strong, inflation was down, and Trump's screwing it all up. Actually, no. He inherited something bad, and now he's trying to fix the ship while it's sailing on the high seas, and that's not an easy thing to do. He may have done some things wrong, you can argue that, but he didn't get this thing that was just ready to go. And the data late is showing us that very fact.
I think it's going to come down to when the CPI and PPI come out, we're going to be looking very clearly at goods prices inflation versus services, because mostly up till now it's been a creeping up of services inflation. If it's goods, there's going to be an argument that tariffs indeed have raised prices, but that is a one-time adjustment. It isn't like a blowing up of the money supply, which continues to push inflation into subsequent months. Presumably, at least the Chris Waller and the people who are advocating for interest rate cuts are arguing that this is a one-time adjustment. Central banks have treated them as that in the past, not ours, but others. And that's the proper way to adjust to it. So, I think it's going to be a little nuanced, which I hate to say because none of us really wants to deal with nuance. But I think it'll depend on where the inflation's coming from, what the Fed actually can argue on this.
And it's a good point because all the trade deals haven't been done at once. So that one-time impact is not going to be felt all at once. It's going to be a little bit here, a little bit there.
Yeah,
much
these
more manageable.
tariffs could get thrown out by SCOTUS.
I can't even imagine what a mess that's going to be.
But to wrap it up, I think the point is that everything that the Biden administration said about their economy and even the Trump economy they inherited was just a lie. Yeah. For 4 years, they talked about we needed to run up the debt by $8 trillion because the economy was on its knees when we took over. And it was a lie. It was growing at almost 7%, I think, and inflation was at 1.4% at the end of the first Trump term. Yeah. And they created a fiscal outhouse. That's not what I was going to say, Jack.